So basically a little bit about myself. Okay, my name's Ewington. I am from New Zealand, that's why I'm the one without the accent. You are the guys with the accent. You understand that? Okay. Basically, I've been with Microsoft since about 2000. Prior to that, I was an IBM mainframe developer doing Kix COBOL DB2 work, which is actually quite bizarre if you think about my background. I also spent 6 years in IT management, doing lots of things like development manager, IT manager, project director, and stuff like that. I basically came to the conclusion that I was a bit of a geek at heart, joined Microsoft, and I've been working there since 2000. However, it hasn't quite been a continuous employment, as about 5 years ago I decided to leave for about 6 months, and as my colleagues like to remind me, Microsoft made the mistake twice, okay, by rehiring me. Basically, I've had a bit of a love-hate relationship with SharePoint. Basically, I started on using with SharePoint 2001. Basically, come through the things. Do you want to sit in the middle? We're going to be cozy. Plus, you're guaranteed to get some swag. Okay. So basically, I've kind of had a love-hate relationship with SharePoint, as I've kind of mentioned, and I kind of tried to avoid it as much as possible, and then kind of gave up and decided to apply myself to the point where I decided to go through and do the Microsoft Certified Master Certification. Got that back in July 2010, got that. Then I got asked to go through and do the Microsoft Certified Architect Certification. I then got grandfathered into the Microsoft Certified Solution Master Certification, and I actually had a really good result email last night that I got, and I passed my recertification. So I'm now a Microsoft Certified Master for 3 more years. Yay! So I'm pretty thrilled about that. I work in Microsoft Consulting Services. As part of that, also part of the Worldwide Centre of Excellence. So I'm part of what we call the SharePoint Rangers. Okay? So it kind of sounds a bit grand. It kind of sounds like we kind of go out like this. But basically, we actually do work directly for the product team. So if there's any issues or any critical projects, people do what we call ranger requests, and basically we get to go do some work and help and assist on those particular engagements. I'm also a member of the MCSM instructor team, so basically I do some work for that. So if you ever go through a rotation, you may not necessarily see me teach one of the modules, but you'll definitely know or you come across some of the work that I've done there, and that's all I'm going to say about that. My email address is up there, so if you have got any questions about this later on, don't hesitate to contact me and ask me about that. So, what are we going to do? We're going to talk about list throttling, okay? So basically, what is exactly this list throttling? We're going to talk about business connectivity services throttling and this other thing called HTTP throttling. Now, there is another bit of throttling that is new to SharePoint Server 2013, and that's query throttling. Now, we're not actually going to go into that, but that's basically the ability for queries to actually throttle themselves a little bit around providing priorities about, how quickly should they actually do the processing associated with that. So, list throttling, it's pretty straightforward. Basically, this was a new thing introduced in 2010, where it was basically trying to stop the queries that you actually run against SharePoint escalating into table locks. Okay? This is all what we're trying to do. So the issue here was that you'd write a simple query, it would escalate to a table lock behind in SQL, and that would actually block other users from actually coming into it and actually trying to do their own queries and stuff that happened on that. So we actually had this maximum support, or this limit around being about 2,000 items, which was a little bit of a misnomer. Basically, we do have up to supporting of 30 million items in a list, okay, which is huge, which means you can actually do a lot of stuff in there, which is pretty fantastic. So what does this actually do? So basically all we do is that we go into web application settings, and we've got a couple of different things we can do in there. We can go through and set what we call the list view threshold, the default value being 5,000. We can say whether or not we can allow the object model override. Okay. We can then do something for these list thresholds for auditors and administrators, which the default setting is 20,000. And we can actually say how many lookups we can actually do. So basically, if you're doing lookups within your list, we kind of limit this to basically being 8 in there. Then we can have what we call happy hour, so for people to go in there and run these real queries that they want to do. It's pretty straightforward, right? Kind of makes sense. What's the big deal with list throttling? Okay? This is where we're going to have fun. Okay. What we're going to do, we're going to play a game called Who Wants to Be a SharePoint Millionaire? So basically, You have the game show here, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? Where basically you have to answer a number of questions to go through, and basically the last person that answers it gets the prizes and the swag. Guess what we're going to do? We're going to do exactly the same thing. So it's actually quite good that we've got a small number, because like everyone in this room's guaranteed to get some swag so long as you actually want to participate. Okay? So what we've got is that we've got 5 different games. I'll give you a scenario for each of these different games, and we have 6 competitors per game. Basically, there are 6 questions per scenario, in other words, 6 questions per game, and you've got the option, when it comes to your turn, to actually answer the question or to pass. If you answer and you get it wrong, you're out of the game, okay, so you have to leave. If you decide to pass, okay, you basically go to the end of the queue, okay, and the next person there goes in. Basically like how they do Who Wants to Be a Millionaire as it is. If you answer and you are right, you can get the answer to the next question, okay, pretty straightforward stuff. You can only pass once, and the person who answers the last question for the scenario or the game gets the swag, okay? They win the game and they get the swag. And in case there's any disputes, okay, around it, if everyone answers it wrong, the person who answered the most questions right basically gets the swag. And if there's any disputes, I have right of veto. And like I keep on mentioning, I have swag. So basically what has happened here is I checked in additional bag when I flew here from New Zealand, okay, brought some stuff with me that I came to give away for you guys, okay, so this is all the way from New Zealand, very special stuff, and I've also got some booby prizes as well up here, which you'll see very shortly. So basically what we're going to do is that we're going to cover 2 different scenarios. We've got a default list view. So when we see something called a default list view, what I'm talking about here is going in, looking into the list view, going into a list and looking at what are the default items that actually come back out of that and around the configuration settings that we've got. I've also got a custom web part. So basically a web part is actually running some code. All it's basically doing is going out there, querying this large list that I've got sitting in there, and it's running a query, and it's going to return all the items that come back from that as part of running the query. You may want to shift across so you can see. Okay, so pretty straightforward. Everyone understand? We've got a list view, okay? And we've also got this custom web part that we've got, which we're going to go through on the object model. So, for game 1, I need 6 volunteers. Up you come, okay? Just line up here in a line, 6 of you in a line, okay? Everyone gets to have a chance. You can have more than one go. Okay, so I'll show you the swag later. Okay, so I need 3 more volunteers. Okay, 2 more volunteers. Otherwise, we go military style. Okay. So I'll give you the mic. Okay. So basically, this is our scenario. Okay. What we've got is that we've got a list view that contains 6,000 items. Okay. And the default view displays in batches of 2,000 items. We've set the list throttling size through the central admin as what I showed you to be 2,500 for users, 3,500 for the auditors and administrators, which are the super users. We've set the object override to be true. And we've got our web part that's on our main page, basically set to retrieve all the items with the query throttle set to override. If I go to your first question, sir. Okay. Is basically the answer to the question is, if I come in as a reader and look at the default list view, how many items are going to be returned?
2,000.
2,000. Is that your final answer?
Do you want paging on it?
Do you want me to lock it in?
Right, let me think. 2,000.
2,000. Is that your answer? Do I lock it in?
Final answer.
Final answer. It's locked in. Okay. 2,000 items per page. Correct. You get to answer the next question. Okay. If I come in as a super user, okay, come to this page, how many rows are going to be returned for me? Hitting the default list view again.
2,000.
2,000. Do I lock that in?
Yeah.
Lock it in. Okay. 2,000 items per page. Pretty cool. I come in as the box admin. And I go to the default list view.
2,000.
2,000 items per page. Very good. He's doing well. He's on a home run. And the guys at the back there going, don't worry, everyone's guaranteed to get something. Okay. I now look at my web part, and I'm coming in through the object model. I come in as a reader. How many items are going to be returned?
Depends what you put in the query.
My query is to retrieve all records from there. So the query will retrieve every single record back from that list containing 6,000 items. Do you want to phone a friend?
6,000.
6,000. Is that your final answer?
Yeah.
Lock it in?
Yeah.
No items.
Oh.
You've been throttled. You can have a kiwi.
Very much.
Okay. So we come to our super user. Our super user hits this web part. How many items are going to be returned for our super user?
Over threshold.
Over threshold. So no items going to be returned back? Is that your final answer?
Yeah.
Lock it in. Okay, shall we go for an ad break? So I locked in, no items, overlock. 6,000 items are being returned. You can have a kiwi. Okay, now this is for the big answer. Last person, remember, gets the swag. Okay, I come in as a box admin. How many items are going to be returned?
6,000.
6,000. Is that your final answer?
I think so.
You think so? Do you want me to lock it in?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, well done. 6,000 items. So what I've got is, I've got a TechEd New Zealand 2011 bag.
Great, I've got a bag.
You have. Okay, thank you. You guys stay here there, okay? So I need 3 more volunteers to go in for the next game. Go on.
That's the same question as the game.
Okay, that's cool. Doesn't matter if we've got more than 6 because we'll just keep on rotating through, so that's okay. Okay, so for our next game, game number 2, we've got a classic mode web application. The big change that we've done this time is that we've changed our default view to return in batches of 3,000. Okay, so we've still got 6,000 items in the list. 3,000 items are coming in the default view. Okay, the list throttling settings haven't changed. Our web part still returns every bit, every list item. Or does it? We'll find out. I go to the default list view. As a reader, how many items are coming back?
2,500.
2,500? Is that your final answer? Lock it in? Okay, thanks for coming. And pass it along and have a kiwi. Okay. It's actually quite funny. I did this in Australia and I came out of the room and there was a whole lot of kiwis outside the room. You know, because of Australia, love-hate relationship with Australians. So they love us, we hate them. Okay. So as a super user, how many items will you get returned?
3,000 items.
3,000 items. Is that your final answer, sir?
Yes.
Okay, lock it in.
Lock it in.
Okay, 3,000 items, well done. Okay, don't forget you guys can pass if you want to. Okay, so as a box admin, I come in, how many items are going to be returned?
3,000 items.
3,000 items. Okay.
Final answer.
Final answer, locked it, and confident. Very, very confident. Here we go. 3,000 items, well done. Okay, web part.
No items, over threshold.
Over threshold, is it? For the user coming in, for the reader coming in, over threshold? Lock it in?
Yes.
Okay, well done. Okay, so we get throttled on that one. As a super user, how many items are going to come through?
6,000 items.
6,000 items. Lock it in.
Lock it in.
Okay, well done, 6,000 items. Now we get to the winning question. How many items are going to come through?
6,000 items.
Ooh, okay. Do we lock it in?
Lock it in.
Lock it in. Okay, well done. Okay, it is 6,000 items. Okay, now for you, I've got a TechEd 2003 bag. We're going retro. Okay, just want to point out something. If we were to do this under SharePoint Server 2010, this would actually get blocked. Okay, so just be aware of this. This is actually a bit of a change between 2010 to 2013. Under 2013, if we'd come to the default list view as a super reader, we would have been throttled. Okay, so a bit of an interesting change there. Game 3. Exactly the same, except now we're coming in with a claims mode web application under SharePoint Server 2013 using claims. Okay? Okay. Okay. I need 2 more volunteers too, please. If you've gone and failed, you can come again. That's fine, if you want to. I had this guy over here shaking his head before at one of the answers, so you've got to join the queue. Okay, as a reader, coming into the default list view, how many items are going to be returned?
2,500.
2,500.
Let's see if it,
Do you want me to lock it in?
yeah, let's see if it
Okay.
does it different. I thought so.
Well, if you thought so, you would have said.
It means I don't have to answer it. But
Ah, there you go. Okay, as a super user, how many items are going to come back?
3,000.
3,000? Lock it in?
Yeah.
Over threshold. Thanks for coming.
Why?
Why is that our threshold?
Well, we're going to come to that. We will come to that. We will come to that. Okay, box admin. How many items are going to come back? And I'm just going to get this ready.
I'm going to say no items.
No items?
Yeah. I don't know.
Is that your answer?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, you're actually correct. No items. That's very, very interesting, okay? Because under SharePoint Server 2010, you would get items. Okay. Okay. Web part. As a reader,
No items.
no items? Correct. As a super user,
I'll say no items.
no items? Lock it in?
Yeah.
Over threshold. Cool. Now for the winning prize.
Oh, no. I could go with the trend.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll say no items.
No items?
Yeah.
You're correct. No items. You're over the threshold. So, I've got... You went to the SharePoint conference 2011?
I did.
You did. Okay, so you don't want one of those. You can have a
Oh,
retro...
actually, I take it back. No, I didn't. I was thinking.
Oh, okay.
Oh, wait, 2012 I didn't go to. 2011 I did.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's a
Oh, I have
2011 bag. So you can have a TechEd New Zealand 2002
Oh, I don't
bag.
have one of those.
Well done. Okay, so I need 3 more volunteers. You can come again if you want to, man. I've got plenty of swag. Okay, so we're back to classic mode web application, okay, and we've activated the metadata navigation and filtering feature activated on the site, okay? So as a reader, hitting the default list view.
Two and a half thousand.
2,500. 2,500 items. Over threshold. Have a kiwi. Okay. Super reader, super user, I should say.
2,500.
2,500. Have a, oh, 3,000. You got it wrong. Have a Kiwi. Everyone, you just get to go again. Okay, box admin.
3,000.
3,000, correct. Okay, for the web part, coming in as a reader.
Probably no items.
No items, lock it in.
Yeah.
Very good. Getting to the crunch time, getting close to it. Super user,
Oh, I'd say 6,000.
6,000 items,
Yeah.
lock it in.
Yeah.
Okay, 6,000 items. Cool.
Probably the same for the box admin.
Box admin, do I lock it in?
Yeah.
Okay. You can have. Wait, did you go to the SharePoint conference?
No.
Okay, you can have a SharePoint 2011 bag.
Thank you.
Okay, right. This is the last game, and I need. I need 3 more people. You can come again if you want to. Don't be shy. Remember, nobody's passed yet. This is interesting. Okay, right. Okay, so for our last one, we're back to a classic. Now we're hitting an external list. Okay, so we've got an external list which has got 20,000 items in it. We've got the BCS read list filter set to be 3,000 items. Okay, so as part of configuring our model, we've put a filter in there of limiting it to 3,000 items. We've got the default list view coming back in batches of 3,000 items. Okay, as a reader, how many items are going to be returned in the default list view?
Go with the trend. There's got to be a cap sometime. 2,500.
2,500?
Kiwi.
Kiwi? Have a Kiwi. Okay. What colour have you got there? Red, okay. Oh, black, okay.
Black,
We've
yeah.
got a red one ready.
Fantastic. Okay, 3,000.
3,000, have a red one. Okay. Is the box admin?
No items.
You're going to lock that in?
Yep.
Lock it in?
Lock it in.
Very good. Okay. Interesting. Okay. Box admin's not being throttled. Okay. For the web part.
2,500 items.
2,500 items going to come back. Okay. Lock it in.
Yep.
Have a Kiwi. You can have a Kiwi with a bit of string.
It's good. I've got 2 kids.
Do you want a different colour? Okay. Okay. I've got some more Kiwis, so. Okay. Okay. Super reader.
I'm going to go with no items.
No
I have
items.
no idea why.
But you're going to go with no
but I'm
items.
going with the pattern.
Okay, no items. Lock it in.
Yep.
Well done. No items. Okay.
So much for guessing.
Okay. And for our last one, for the swag,
I'm going to say no items again.
lock it in.
Yep.
Okay, shall we ask the audience?
Phone a friend.
Phone a friend? I'm sorry, sir, you missed out. Okay, so I'll lock it in. No items, you're over the threshold. You can have a Kiwi. Oh, okay, thank you. And I'll give you, now this is a real rarity, okay? This is actually an internal Microsoft conference bag called MGB for the Asia Pacific region from 2003. Okay. So, does anybody want a Kiwi? You want a Kiwi? Sure. Anybody? You? Okay. I've only got red and black. Okay. Come and see me afterwards if you want some more Kiwis anyway. Okay, so basically this was a little bit interesting, okay? So there's some weird stuff actually happening there, okay? So basically there's a couple of things we need to be wary about. List throttling actually applies to any operation that actually happens on the list, okay? Any operation. So what this basically means is that if you go to do something and list throttling has basically been applied, or you hit the threshold, okay, something's going to actually happen to it. So we have got this default threshold of being 5,000 items. The lowest we can set this to is only 2,000 items. We've got this other thing called for auditors and admins, which I've basically called the super users. Now the default threshold for this is 20,000 items, but we do actually get some very different behaviour in 2013 based on whether or not we're running in claims mode or running in classic mode. If we're running in claims mode, this only applies for the object model, okay? So only if we're going through the object model if we're in claims mode. So basically if we're coming in through claims and going through the list view, the auditors and administrator setting is not applicable, okay? It doesn't matter, it doesn't mean anything. If we're coming in from a classic mode in 2013, it also applies to the list views. However, there's a bit of a funny one that I discovered today. Basically, it ignores the limits. It basically says, you are a super user, I'm not going to throttle you, but I don't care what the number is. So even if I set, for example, the limit to be 3,500, and I set my list view to be 4,000 items to come back, it will still return 4,000 items for those super users. Wacky. We're actually trying to work out whether or not this is a bug with the product at the moment, okay? But this is quite interesting. It also applies to the object model override as well. Okay, so what are these auditors and administrators, right? I mean, where do these people actually come from? So we talk about these super users being able to do it. We go and configure that through that throttling setting that we've got in the central admin, but how do we define what the auditors and the administrators are? This is actually pretty straightforward. All we do is that we go to the web application, we click on the user policy, okay, which brings up our policy for our web application. What we then do is that we add a user. If we add a user to that and give them either the full control or the full read, that basically makes them a super user. This is the only way that you need to do it. Now this makes it actually quite interesting, because if you want to do this, this is at a web application level. Okay, so you may only want to give it on one particular list, but this is a web application level setting, which means it's going to apply to all the other lists in there. So it really means that if you want to apply this, you do need to think carefully about, do you really want to grant this access to those people, because it's going to be right across everything. Makes it a little bit interesting. So the other thing that we've got is this exceptions. Okay, so we've got the happy hour. So basically the admin goes in through there and sets that when it's going to be applicable. We've also got the option to go to a specific list and change the enable throttling property on that list to say we don't actually want to apply list throttling on that. Okay, so that can actually get around some of those issues that you can potentially have on that. So you've got a large list, people are getting throttled on it all the time because of various reasons. You may want to, I say may, want to go and change the property on that list such that they can actually ignore the throttling that's actually happening on there, and hence everything else doesn't apply to it. Box admin's interesting. This is the big change from 2010. List throttling in 2010 does not apply to the box admin. What that basically means is that if you're in the administrators group on the server that is actually processing that query, you will not be throttled. Okay, which makes it interesting. Think about development environments. Okay, developers are by default the local administrators. They're doing all their fantastic code, they're writing all their code, they create this large list, they're not being throttled, they chuck it into production, gets throttled and they go, but it works in my environment. Okay, common scenario. So basically it does mean is that what you should also be doing in testing in part of your development environment is actually having a user account, if you can, that isn't the local administration account. But for 2013, okay, this only applies in classic web applications only. If you've got a claims web application, claims mode web application, it doesn't give a monkey about whether or not you're an administrator or not. Okay, you will get throttled. okay, which actually makes it quite an interesting behaviour that we've got associated with that. So essentially what it will do is it will bypass the user and super user. It works on the browser and object model. So if we go in through the list view, okay, and you're a box admin and you're in classic web mode, okay, you won't get throttled. And there is some situations too that you need to make sure that IE is actually running as a local administrator as well, okay, just to make sure that it's actually picking that up, detecting it. So a little bit interesting. So the metadata navigation and filtering feature. Now this was actually quite an interesting thing that would happen, that what you could do is actually change the behaviour as to how the rows get returned back under how the rows get returned back when you go to retrieve them back on a list. So what it basically does is that you activate this feature in your site, and it changes the behaviour of how the queries are actually being performed on your list, regardless of whether or not you actually configure this setting or not. Okay? Simply by activating this feature, it will change the behaviour. So what it will basically do is that if you actually hit the threshold, it will then try and do what we call a retry query. Okay? So do this magical stuff behind the scenes. So what it'll try and do is look at what are the type of things that you're actually trying to select against, and try and then use the indexes on that to reduce the subset to bring you back down under the max threshold level that we actually had set there. So if we kind of go back to our game scenario where we had if we had the metadata navigation feature activated, okay, what it would basically do is it would get up to the max threshold level, okay? It can't guarantee it, but we'd get an up to level being set there. The thing that it also then does is that if it can't do the retry query, it goes back to the fallback query, which basically just gives you a real subset and then just gives you a display notification. So this is quite a nice little funky feature, which kind of should basically be enabled on all your sites by default. Okay? Sounds good. Doesn't work in 2013. Okay? This is a change between 2010 to 2013, which is a little bit wacky, a little bit bizarre. So basically, if you've got a 2010 site, this works great. Okay? This also makes it interesting too if you do an upgrade. If you go from 2010 to 2013 and upgrade, you've got the feature you thought you were being great, and you get the little notification to say that you've had a fallback query. Guess what? You're going to get throttled, okay? Which is a little bit unfortunate. So, moving on. So we've got this row and column throttling. So basically, what we've got is that as part of our throttling, we can specify what's our row size limit. Essentially what the idea behind this is the way that SharePoint actually works behind the scenes. So if we've got a list item, the way that it is physically stored in the database doesn't necessarily equate to just one row within inside the database. Okay? Because we can add additional columns into this, that one row could actually be multiple rows within inside SQL Server. Okay? So what we basically do is that we've got the setting here which basically says that if we've got a row that goes more than 6 rows within inside SQL Server, okay, basically we're going to throttle your query on that. Now the only way we can actually go through and change this is using the object model. The other lookup threshold we've got is around the number of lookup columns. So basically we've got the default being there 8. So we could have like lookups, we could have metadatas. It's basically doing lookups to other tables. Now the reason behind that not being set to 8 is that if it gets, because this is quite an expensive action, what it could potentially do is escalate to a table lock within SQL Server, which will basically lock out the table from the other users. So hence that's the reason that we've got that in there. Some large list gotchas. Any operation that actually happens on a list or a site can actually cause the throttling to kick in. Okay, so think about this. You add an index, you remove an index from a field, you delete an index field, you add a calculated column onto a large list. Okay, your throttling will kick in. You go to delete a list. Okay, so you've got a large list, okay, which is above the threshold. You go to delete that list, you won't be able to because you're being throttled. It's a bit wacky.
So the question is how to delete this one list?
Well, what you need to do is make sure that you're in classic mode, okay, and you come in as the box admin because you're not being throttled. Well, PowerShell potentially away, but it comes back down to what's the context that you're running under, okay?
So elevation doesn't stop. Elevation doesn't help either.
Wait for party.
It may not help because you need to be box admin, okay?
You just set your window and delete it and happy hour.
Yep, or that's the other way of doing it. Yep, do it programmatically, get over and make sure that the threshold's nice and high. You change your field's uniqueness, you show totals, you change the list relationship, you enable disabled attachments on a list. Any of these actions will do it. The other one that will actually catch a few people out too is that if you do group buys. Okay, so if you do group buys on your list, essentially, although you're only bringing back and showing only a few items in there, the query that it's generating behind the scenes is effectively doing a complete select statement. Okay, you will get throttled on those as well. Kind of makes sense, okay? So it's a little bit interesting. Sorry, I don't understand the question. Well, I hope not. Sorry, I don't understand the question.
We use group buy a lot because we have large.
Oh, okay. So using group buys, okay.
We've imported it from 2007, and it's just not working.
Yeah, okay. So to rephrase the question, what's the uptake of using group buys? Okay, and are there issues associated with it? The cold reality is that a lot of people like using group buys, okay? And I try and refrain them from doing that if I can, and try and use views instead, or modify have a different type of view or do a filter associated with that if I can. Yeah.
Does this affect the permissions as well? In the sense, if you're trying to apply permissions to a list where you've got this threshold.
Any operation on the list.
If you fill the list down with group by,
Yep.
which one wins?
But if you did a filter and then the group by, then you could be okay. Okay, you've got to think about what the query is that's actually being generated behind the scenes.
Will it filter before it then displays?
I need to double check on that. It depends on how it generates the camel query behind the scenes. Yeah, I know Neil's kind of thinking over it as to what's probably how it works. Yeah, we'll need to follow up on that one. Yeah, cool. So, quick demo of this. Okay, do you want to actually see list throttling in action? Okay, see what I've been talking about? Okay. Okay. So what I've got is that I've got a number of different virtual machines running here. So I've got a number of different web applications. So I've got a classic web application, and I've also got a claims mode web application as well. So I'm actually on the current box. So I'm actually running as administrator on this particular box. So with the blue background, this is claims. With the orange background, this is classic. Okay, so just to kind of make sure that we've got the different views associated with this. So if we go to the home page here, let's go through and have a look at the settings in here first, okay? So we go to the general settings, we go into the resource throttling. We've got this set to be 2,500, 3,500. Pretty straightforward. In fact, I'll just zoom in a little bit, make sure that you guys can see that okay. So 2,500 items in there, 3,500, got the object model overrides being set. Fairly straightforward. Super user's been defined on here, so we've gone into the user policy, and click down here, control 1, okay. And I've basically, by giving that full read, it's basically made it a super user. Okay, so that person won't get throttled on there. If I go to this is claims mode, I've got my little list web part on here. I've got my large list sitting over here. Retrieve the data back on here. I get throttled, okay? When I saw this for the first time, I freaked out, okay? Because I was expecting this not to be throttled, okay? Because this is a big change of behavior from 2010 to 2013, okay? So this is going to freak a few people out. If I do the same thing under the classic mode, override it, retrieve the data, I get the count of 6,000 items coming back, pretty straightforward. If I go to my my Windows 7 box where I'm actually running as a super user. So I'm test user 1, the one that you saw before. If I could click on home, come on, wake up. It's working on it. Don't you love that hip? Yeah. I hate it when marketing get involved. Oops, I'm being recorded, aren't I? I'm going to get a DCM, but don't come Monday now. Okay. So, large list, come on. That's basically playing up. Let's click on home on that one. Really try to kill it. That one's working. Come on, go. Okay. So anyway, we do the override on that one. Basically, super user, which is a bit of a surprise, right? Because our setting there was 3,500. It's basically saying we're going to ignore throttling, okay? But we're also going to ignore the limits on us. Wacky. Okay. We do the same thing here under our claims, and we get throttled as expected on that one. And I think that will basically do. Otherwise, you kind of get the feel for what we're doing there. And I am conscious that this is the last session of the conference, so we'll keep going. Right. Okay. So, external lists. Okay, so this is a little bit of a surprise to some of you. Basically, external lists do bypass the list throttling mechanisms that we've got in place. What it basically means is that the BCS throttle rules actually kick in, and they've got a different set of parameters associated with those. So they look at different things such as the number of items, the size of the data that's coming back, the connections, the timeouts, and also it looks at the scopes as to what you're doing, whether or not you're hitting the global, the database, the web services, a WCF, or a custom. Now the reason that, although in our example we had 3,000 items being set as the list filter, that is actually before, or after I should say, it actually gets to that. BCS has already got its own filters in place. The default setting for that is 2,000 items. So when it comes through from BCS, does the default setting of 2,000 items, it hits our list filter of being 3,000. We've already been filtered, so we never throttled, so we never actually get the items. Now you can actually go through and change these settings if you want to, and you can do that through PowerShell. The guidance I usually give on doing this is that be very, very careful and wary about doing this. Those are actually being set there for a reason. If you do want to go and change those settings, make sure you do appropriate testing to make sure that you actually understand the consequences of changing those. So then we've got HTTP throttling. So this is the other thing that we've got, which is basically the same as from 2010 to 2013. What we can do is that we can set up this HTTP request monitoring and throttling by enabling that on our particular web application that we've got. So what this basically does is we get an HTTP request that comes in. It hits the SharePoint server, and what it first of all it does is sets this request priority. And we're going to go into a bit more detail about what this actually means. It then comes in and checks the server status. So it basically checks the health of the actual server that it's doing the processing against. It then decides whether or not it wants to throttle it. If it does want to throttle it, it throws back a 503. Otherwise, it does a no, and it sets back an HTTP response back to the actual client that's got there. So what this looks like is from a set priority, we can actually say what's going to be the priority of this request. We can say it's high, medium, or low, and we can also determine what the priority is going to be based on the user agent field that's actually coming through on the HTTP request. So based on things like the robot, the user, the office, the SOAP, or the SOAP user ID that we've actually got coming through on there. So we've got some general rules around assigning the actual priority to this. Okay? So receive requests, so requests that have already been received by SharePoint are not going to be throttled. They're still going to go through and complete. So long as it's actually hit the server, we're good to go. Okay? We're going to take care of you. The other thing too is that user-initiated requests should be processed. Okay? So if the user agent isn't something like search, we're going to make sure that you actually get higher priority because it makes more sense to keep the farm going and actually respond to the users that are actually using our farm. The other thing too is that we make sure that HTTP puts should never be throttled. What are we doing when we're doing an HTTP put? we're actually sending something back to SharePoint. So we're actually saving something back into SharePoint. So therefore, we want to make sure that that's never throttled. We want to make sure we can actually get that data back into SharePoint so we're actually saved and committed. Okay? Then what we do is that we go through and check the server status. So the way that we do this is that we actually go through and check them using performance counters. By default, we have two different performance counters that we look at. We've got the memory, and we've got the ASP.NET requests queued that are actually being queued up with it. Now, the default settings for that is 20 megabytes and 500 requests queued. The way we can determine what we've actually got there is running this lovely PowerShell commandlet, which is to get SP Web Application HTTP throttling monitor. This must be one of the longest PowerShell commandlets we've got, but it will basically return back out what is actually our performance counters that we're actually checking to actually monitor against. Now, when we do this, we get back what we call the associated health score calculator, which sounds a little bit flash, okay? Basically, with this particular calculator thing, it's basically a bucket of numbers. That's all it is, just a bucket of numbers. So in this particular case, if we look at available memory, it's 10 buckets, okay? If you want to create your own ones, okay, 10 is the maximum number of buckets you can do, okay? You can do less, but you can't do more. In fact, if you do more, they actually get ignored, okay? So we can go through, set the number of buckets that we've got, and basically these buckets represent what is a healthy state from a value perspective through to an unhealthy state, okay? So basically these are the numbers. So if we look at what we've got from an available memory perspective, if we've got 1,000 megabytes of available memory, we're in a healthy state. If we've got 20 megabytes of available memory, we're in an unhealthy state. So what that basically means is that anything past that last value will get throttled. So what this basically means is that when we are, oops, there should have been something in there. So what this means is that the last value is actually probably the most critical value that we need to think about. So although we've got up to 10 items in our buckets, or what we're looking at there, the last number is actually the significant one because that represents when we move into an unhealthy state. So if we look at the available memory, we've got our buckets again. So if we've got a value of coming in of 2,048, that is less than 1,000. So therefore, we get a score of being 0, being put back in that. So we're good. If we get a value of 276, that is between bucket 3 and 4. So therefore, we got a score of 4 coming back in it. Make sense? The next one's really hard. We get a value of 16. Okay, we're going to get a score of 10. We are now throttled. Okay, we're going to throttle this particular request because we are in an unhealthy state. It's actually that's trying to process this request. So, like I mentioned, the most important number is actually that last number, and that's the one that actually determines whether or not we're going to be throttled or not.
Are these scores then what you get returned with each HTTP request in the header?
They are indeed, and that is the next slide. So the question is, are these the values we get back in HTTP headers? And they most certainly are, okay? So basically the clients do get the health scores in the HTTP response, okay? It's the X SharePoint health score, okay? And it's a straightforward value in there. Also note that the worst score is actually returned as well, okay? So it's the worst score that actually comes back. What this means is that if your client is intelligent enough and is looking at these particular scores, you can actually do something about it. So for example, the Office 2010 and 2013 clients, if they start seeing that they're getting unhealthy scores coming back, they will actually pull back. They will throttle themselves from sending the data back up because they know that SharePoint farm is under pressure, okay? It's quite funky, okay? So it's quite a neat thing you could do. So what this basically means is that what you should probably be thinking about is that when you're developing your own your own customizations, you should probably be looking at this HTTP response to see if, should you actually be putting SharePoint under pressure or not, or should you back off a little bit? So, I'm finishing rather early, but that's fine. Hopefully everyone's okay with that. So we've got list throttling. Okay, so hopefully everyone kind of understood that it's exactly not that straightforward. Remember the exceptions, okay, bearing in mind that the behaviours have completely changed from 2010 to 2013. Think about the managed metadata and filtering feature, particularly in 2010 environments, okay? Think about upgrading and what's going to be the change of behaviour that happens in there. BCS throttling's got a completely different set of parameters, and we've got HTTP throttling, and think about your client applications that could actually happen there. And that's basically me wrapped up. Okay, if you've got any questions, fine. If anybody wants some more Kiwis, fine as well. I've got plenty to give away.